what the role was and should be, what went good, what went wrong when it comes to the responsibility of the World Health Organization, how you look at COVAX, but how do you look also at what happened within the European Union, the responsibilities in the European Union, and the relationship. And of course, also, how do you look at the future, being also responsible for the pandemic treaty. Mr. Ryan, Dr. Ryan, sorry, I give you the floor to give your introductory remarks, and then we go to the questions. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me there?
Yes, we can hear and see you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. And I'd just like to thank the European Parliament Special Committee on COVID-19 and particularly you as Chair for the invitation to speak and the opportunity to have an exchange with the members of the committee. Also to congratulate the Special Committee's work, in particular for the focus on this lessons learned exercise and recommendations for the future. We must learn from this pandemic as we must learn from all crises. And this is, I think, the right moment to exchange views with relevant stakeholders and see where we go from here with so much going on right now globally around governance, financing, systems, tools, workforce for the future, how we will govern, finance and deliver on pandemic preparedness in the future and health emergency preparedness. It's really important that we make these commitments and have these discussions before the current pandemic ends. I'm pleased I can't see everyone there, but I'm sure some of you, we met first in Geneva during the 75th World Health Assembly, and we've already had a fruitful discussion at that time, and I hope this discussion today will further contribute to that. Our thanks to Team Europe for the global pandemic response and your support to WHO. I think overall Team Europe has delivered huge amounts of euros, so I think over 47 billion euros to help its partners to address the pandemic and its consequences, which is a vast amount of support. Actually through Team Europe, I think the EU and the member states have played a leading role in the fight against the pandemic. There's been a strong partnership between the EU and WHO in support of our common ambitions for health across a much wider area than COVID, and we just acknowledge that the European Union is the largest voluntary contributor of funds to WHO in both 2021 and 22-23. So all of this partnership is leading to...
Sorry, Dr. Ryan, can you... Because you're too close to the camera and then the interpreters cannot see your mouth to interpret. That is much better. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it's a strange Zoom. Normally I'm in the perfect place when I sit close to the desk. Is that okay now?
This is perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good. So this partnership is very deep, and for stronger health systems, universal health coverage, access to medicines, response to emergencies, prevention and control of antimicrobial resistance, driving on One Health approach to global challenges. I think the EU and WHO are very aligned on what are the key priorities going forward, and particularly in the areas of the health impact of climate change with COP27 coming up. I'm sure you're watching the various reports that are coming out at the moment, and the situation is very fraught and very dangerous right now. And how are we going to help countries to make their environments healthier, help their populations, improve sexual and reproductive health, and keep at bay communicable and non-communicable diseases? So, in a sense, the pandemic has demonstrated that health and health access and access to health products is absolutely fundamental to achieving our goals within the SDGs, and absolutely fundamental to protecting our population against future pandemics. But it also highlighted the need for a strong, coordinated, multilateral international response. When that was present, we did well. When that was not so present, we behaved in ways that didn't drive a coherent response. And we must learn how to further enhance those cooperative instincts, those partnership instincts, and build the systems that build off that strong base. There was a crucial role played by government, by leaders in political system, by parliaments and parliamentary platforms that have enabled The partnerships enabled engagement with civil society, have built trust with communities, and we need to focus on the role of parliaments at all levels in doing that. And we are putting a lot of focus in our activities on engagement with parliaments, and we'll soon finalise our first WHO strategy on parliamentary engagement. You had sent forward a number of questions very specifically to us. I will try and address those in my remarks, but I'm sure there may be follow-up questions. I'm also joined online by Kate O'Brien, who's our Director of Immunisation, Vaccines and Biologics, IVB, and Kate has been absolutely central and a huge leader in the whole space of vaccination against COVID and the whole COVAX initiative, and she will be online to join me to answer any questions after. You did put some questions on the IP waivers and TRIPS. You know that the objectives and principles of the TRIPS agreement, it protects the intellectual property, but should contribute to the promotion of innovation and to the transfer and dissemination of technology to mutual advantage in a manner conducive of social and economic welfare, and to balance those rights and obligations. That's a difficult balance. The TRIPS agreement allows members to formulate their own laws and regulations and to adopt measures to provide necessary public health protection and to promote public interest in sectors of vital importance to their socio-economic and technological development. This was precisely the intention of the original TRIPS waiver presented by several countries. The ministerial TRIPS decision is a first step in the right direction, but with a more limited waiver. I think it's important that we need to build the incentives for the development of vaccines and continue to do so. We also need to recognise that the vast amount of this investment is coming from public sources, taxpayers' money being used to develop these products, and as such, the issue cannot only be driven by the intellectual property rights of the private sector. We can discuss that further if you so wish. You asked some questions about the lessons we've learned from COVAX, and Kate will be here to answer any further questions or make further comments in a little while. COVAX has delivered nearly 1.9 billion doses of COVID to 146 countries since the start of the programme. It has been key to addressing global vaccine inequity, delivering over 75% of vaccine doses to low-income countries. In other words, if you live in a low-income country, there's a 3 out of 4 chance that the vaccine you got came from COVAX. And this includes 350 million doses that have been shipped by COVAX of the 407 million doses shared by the EU countries. More than 40 countries were only able to start their immunisation programmes as a result of COVAX. So in terms of learning, we are learning more and more that equitable access requires end-to-end solutions that centre on public health and the need of the most vulnerable being considered every step. It cannot just be at the last step in terms of distribution and equity. Hoarding, export restrictions and nationalism can be expected. All governments are primarily accountable to their own people for their protection. So we need to build the institutional models in advance for sharing and partnership, where governments collectively can pursue the best benefit to all by vaccinating. In this case, COVID would have been vaccinating some people in all countries in order to reduce the death burden in those most vulnerable. And we need to find better ways of bringing that together in advance. A successful pandemic response also involves taking risks in the sense of financial and political risks in order to advance the common good. And in that sense, COVAX was able to draw on huge experience within the partner institutions and leading global health organisations that are trusted pioneers in their area of expertise. So this way, COVAX built on existing operational capabilities. It was remarkable to see, the heads of agencies coming together day after day, week after week, and all of their work and all of their staff working together to really fight to get this vaccine to all corners of the planet. Was really the application of global regulatory standards, labelling, barcoding, all of the things that had to be done in order to deliver this were remarkable. The collaboration worked well. Meeting country demand actually went well once we had enough available doses. We supported country readiness and delivery and systematically tried to improve the country's capability to deliver the vaccines down to the last mile. There have been several challenges, certainly in terms of delivering the doses in 2021, disruptions in the vaccine supply, unpredictability of supply in the longer term. We've got ample supplies, but getting shots into arms has become even more critical. The early political support provided and the financial commitment to the facility meant that critical investments in R&D and manufacturing were able to be made, but not enough to be able to capture the necessary proportion of the market. In terms of the future, there's lots to be talked about the models for future collaboration, for future access to countermeasures. We have the COVAX example, we have the PIP example in influenza, we have the ICG examples for Ebola, meningitis, yellow fever and cholera. We have many global mechanisms. We now need to move forward and consider in advance of the next pandemic, what are the best platforms, for us to prepare. I think there was also a question on the key elements of a European strategy for lower and middle income countries. I think it helps the EU when you have a mechanism like COVAX that can coordinate the supplies to countries. It reduces the administrative burden for low and middle income countries. I think the EU should really look at reducing or removing earmarking of doses for specific countries. And obviously, the EU as a leader in working through mechanisms like COVAX to prioritise financing of doses purchased through such a mechanism. In terms of One Health, there was another question that was asked in the One Health high-level panel. There's a lot of work going on inside WHO and now within the quadripartite with FAO, OIE and UNEP, looking at One Health, looking at particularly the animal-human interface and the threat of emerging zoonoses and the particularly risky points on that animal-human interface. There's a lot of work been done by the One Health panel on a theory of change, a framework designed to guide and provide priorities for the organisations aforementioned. We've got a lot of work to do on implementing the advice and recommendations of the One Health panel, but we also have other panels, the Scientific Advisory Group on Origins, we have a Strategic and Technical Advisory Group on Infectious Hazards. So we have many groups who are working in this space right now, helping the Secretariat here in WHO, inputting to Member States, and really trying to design a future in which One Health is at the centre of everything we do, both in terms of risk management, risk reduction, surveillance, and I believe that we're on a pathway now to taking a much more fundamentally integrated approach to One Health. The One Health panel are now developing a white paper on definitions of prevention and many other things, which will be presented to the Secretariat of Member States in due course. You also asked some questions on the pandemic treaty. First of all, thanks to the European Union for your leadership in driving the discussions and negotiations on a WHO convention or agreement or other international instrument in a member state-led process under the intergovernmental negotiating body, which continues to work very hard on this. It is for our member states, it is for you to decide what such a treaty should contain. We believe that this could be a groundbreaking generational change in the way we do business at global level in terms of pandemic preparedness for the future and health emergency preparedness. We need to continue to build the governance, the financing, the systems, the tools and the workforce, the access to countermeasures that are going to be needed in any future pandemic. Doing that without a clear high-level agreement on how that is to be done, a treaty binding everybody to a set of behaviours, a set of commitments, a set of interactions that will guide us and make us more successful in a truly interconnected global system for public health surveillance, public health preparedness, public health response and recovery. I think that's it. There was some question on trips again, but I think I've referred to that in my previous input. So sorry I was just trying there to get as much response up front to the questions that we were provided with. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. We move to the questions then after your introduction, Mr. Kimperopoulos.
Thank you once again. And I would like to thank the Executive Director, Mr. Jan, for being with us today. I will be brief. Having a strengthened global health architecture with a reinforced WHO at the center is fundamental in order to improve our pandemic preparedness and increase our emergency surveillance. In this regard, how do you see the role of the WHO in the post-COVID era? Is it reinforced or not? And how do you assess the response during the first stages of the pandemic? Would you do something differently? But the pandemic also shed a light upon the importance of mental health. And therefore, I wanted to know, how do you mainstream mental health within your work on health emergencies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me also raise a few questions. It's now 2.5 years that we know this virus, that we got acquainted with it, but we still do not actually know what the origin is. Does the World Health Organization has a view on that, or a beginning of a view on that? Also, on the past and on the beginning of the pandemic, in the beginning, China downplayed the severity of the virus and the effect it's had on the health of people. Did the World Health Organization adequately address that with China, and how can we make sure next time we can solve that problem? And it also connects to a suggestion and PAHO yesterday made when we had a discussion with them. They mentioned that many countries did not comply with international health regulation, and so that there were problems over there. And they suggested that we should strengthen the international health regulation by introducing sanctions. A last question is the technical hub. Was most of the time, the medicine patent pool, was empty for most of the pandemic, and ACTA-A has been widely regarded as a failure. Do you look at it the same way? Does the World Health Organization look at it the same way? And what should we do to ensure that it doesn't happen next time around? You have the floor, Dr. Ryan. Dr. Ryan, press the speak button, please.
I did already. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's
Sometimes it takes 2 clicks. In terms of taking the role of WHO, and I think maybe to take a step back, there's a perception that in some way WHO is a building in Geneva. We're a secretariat, and I'm sure you feel the same thing in the European Union. We're a secretariat to 194 member states. Our job is to implement their will through the resolutions that they put in place, through the regulations that they agree, through the accords and conventions that they agree under the WHO Constitution. So our job, do I see a role for WHO moving forward? Absolutely, because WHO has 194 member states. We are now in a world deeply threatened by increasing epidemics, increasing health crises. For the first time ever, we have over 50 graded emergencies at WHO for which we're providing international response at the same time. COVID is just one, counted as one in that. We are seeing a deep intertwining of health, climate, conflict, vulnerability, injustice, lack of access to healthcare. And these are self-amplifying in places like the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Middle East, in Africa and everywhere. We're seeing an increase in the risk of epidemic disease. We're seeing huge pressure in our environment. We're seeing breaches of the animal-human species barrier, we're seeing amplification of disease and unsafe healthcare facilities, we're seeing dissemination of disease around the world. And all of that's not because of viruses, that's not because of the microbes. That's because of human behaviour, that's because of human exploitation, it's because of human greed, it's because we are using up the resources on this planet, and we have created a fragile planet, a disrupted ecosystem in association with that planet, and we are leaving billions of people behind in destitution without adequate access to healthcare, to life or livelihood. That is what we've set up. That is all driven by human endeavour. We talk about human innovation and human science and our ability to create all of these solutions, but we're creating solutions for problems that are essentially 100% man-made, person-made problems. So in that sense, do I see a role for the World Health Organization as an alliance of 194 member states? Absolutely. Without that World Health Organization, what are we going to do? Where are we going to be? Is each individual country, is each individual regional bloc going to come up with their own global solutions for a completely disrupted ecosystem, for a highly vulnerable population around the world, where the people of the South are paying the debts of the people of the North, the climate debts of the people of the North? Something has to give, something has to change. And I do believe, personally, that the World Health Organization is a fantastic platform to do that on. Like all organizations, like all secretariat, we must evolve, we must improve, we must provide better services to our member states, but it is ultimately for our member states to do that. The questioner asked about mental health, very, very important issue. In relation to COVID, we've seen tremendous pressure on people, ordinary people, on health workers. We've seen anxiety, we've seen post-traumatic stress disorder in health workers, and that's only dealing with the direct impacts of COVID-19 on mental health. We have a global mental health crisis, and mainstreaming mental health into universal health access, mainstreaming mental health services into our primary healthcare services, making sure that people have access to diagnosis, to support, to preventive measures, is absolutely essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. There is no point bringing a population of 7.5 billion people to physical health if their mental health is at risk. And the definition of health by WHO is very clear from going back to Alma Ata in terms of the state of physical and mental well-being. So I don't think it's been done enough yet. I don't think mental health has been mainstreamed enough anywhere yet, at local, national, or at global level. So I hear you in calling for that mainstream of mental health into the system. In terms of disease origins, we have a scientific advisory group on origins that's been working over the last year, looking at the evidence, the scientific evidence for disease origins. We know there are a number of different hypotheses for the origin of SARS-CoV-2. All of those hypotheses still remain on the table. The SAGO met last, I believe, in Thailand last week, and continue to meet to advance the scientific understanding of the origins of the disease. But no, to answer your question, we do not specifically understand the specific proximal origin of the virus. What we do know is that the virus emerged in humans in Wuhan in China, and it is working back from that initial clusters of disease that we need to be able to understand what the origins was. But we do know that the likely origin of the virus was in a small mammal or bat, but the route by which that virus got into humans is in question and still remains under investigation. And with regards to the initial reporting of the disease, the syndrome at the time that was not obviously recognised as SARS-CoV-2 or COVID, the WHO responded immediately to the first signals of an unusual disease in Wuhan and engaged very robustly with colleagues in China around getting access to information, getting access to the field, and it is something that we need to continue to work on with our member states. And it's not just one member state. Many member states when a disease is beginning and starting to spread within a country, there is a lot of local and national concern. Getting full transparency at a global level is something that we struggle with in many situations. And right now, I've just come from a meeting of the states parties to the international health regulations. We're meeting right now with the IHR Review Committee, and they're actually actively considering a whole set of amendments, potential amendments and adjustments to the IHR based on the experience of COVID and other epidemics. Again, it's for the member states to decide the extent to which the IHR should be changed and the extent to which any sanctions should be introduced into the IHR process. We wait for their deliberations on that, and as I say, there's an active process underway to do that. In terms of Act A, I would disagree with you in the sense that characterising Act A as a failure. I believe personally that the organisations that came together in Act A came together to try and solve a massive problem in the midst of tremendous hoarding, greed and difficulty, where individual states and individual country groupings were not willing necessarily to share all the benefits that came from the products that were emerging. And I do believe that the ACT Accelerator and COVAX in particular provided an absolutely vital lifeline for the provision of vaccines to particularly to low-income countries and low and middle-income countries. The fact that organisations came together and put aside their institutional rivalries or institutional reputations or institutional advocacy in order to work together, and they did work together consistently and persistently over 2.5 years to solve these problems, I believe they deserve huge credit for that attempt. Now, within that, were there structural issues? Were there barriers to getting that job done most efficiently? I've laid out some of those barriers. Most of those barriers were put in place by the actions of others. But I'm sure with active evaluation and with future assessment, I believe we will find better ways to bring together that multilateral partnership that's needed in advance of the next pandemic. Very valuable lessons were learned. It wasn't perfect. By no means was it perfect. But I would just not characterise that as a failure, in the sense that the billions of people who've now been vaccinated with vaccines through the COVAX initiative, the people who've received oxygen, the health workers who've got access to PPE, the countries that have had access to diagnostics through the ACT Accelerator, I think would disagree. This has not been a failure. But building a system in the middle of a massive pandemic is not the right time to build such a system. So any of the flaws, I think, of structure, any of the flaws of process came from having to build a life raft in the middle of a massive flood, as opposed to building it in advance. And I think there are lessons to learn going forward on how we can build that better into the future. I just wanted to ask if Kate O'Brien was online. She might want to add to that point.
Give the floor to Brian.
O'Brien, to very quickly, because we need to move on. So many other questions. Ms. O'Brien, if you have to add, or if you want to add something to that. And press the speak button.
Down.
Can we not just put on the screen, press the speak button?
Which is down.
Which is down. We'll come back to that later on. I first now move to the questions, to the next questions. Mrs. D'Amato, please.
Avevo 3 domande, ne faccio una per lasciare spazio.
I had 3 questions. I'll only ask one, though, to leave time. The national plans during pandemics. Now, the World Health Organization asks us to update these plans every 3 years. Now, Italy, which was badly hit, had a plan that was dated 2006. Then there was another report, expensive report from the WHO, who made a report on Italy, and it was tragic, and yet nobody looked at it. And the scientists responsible for it was bullied and forced to a certain extent to retire. Now, the person responsible in Italy is the Director General of the organization. So the number 2 of the WHO, our citizens start wondering, how is our health protected? Now, during the pandemic, this technical and scientific committee, there was another doctor, Dr. Ricciardi, who's a member of the executive body of the WHO, who closed the National Monitoring Agency for Health. Now, how can we prevent diseases and prevent possible future transmissible diseases and pandemics if then the national services are so bad? And we have members who are members of the WHO, part of it, but don't take their responsibility seriously.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'espère que le docteur...
Thank you. I hope that Dr. Ryan can hear us. A couple of questions for you, Dr. Ryan. Firstly, on YouTube, that often contradicts the opinion of local healthcare officials on the vaccine targeting COVID-19. Robert Malone, that his video has been censored. What about his video on myocarditis linked to COVID-19, despite the fact that the WHO itself has identified a link between mRNA vaccines and myocarditis? This is more common amongst young men and after a second dose. Has YouTube been in touch with the WHO to talk about myocarditis? How does YouTube communicate with you? How often do you make experts available to YouTube? Another point, WHO deals with the post-pandemic period. Now, I understood that in September that the pandemic period was over. We're no longer in a crisis period. What criteria is used to change the period, to switch to a post-pandemic period? What about the impact on liability of pharma companies? A final point, the European Medicines Agency gave the green light for use of bivalent vaccines against COVID-19. That began on the 3rd of October last. However, WHO believes that there is insufficient data at the moment. You say that they're not less effective than earlier versions, but we don't know whether they offer an advantage. So what type of vaccine would you currently recommend? And what about prevention, preparation and response to pandemics in general? How do you convey your point of view? Thank you.
Merci. Dr. Ryan. And then maybe afterwards I see that Ms. O'Brien can then join afterwards. Mr. Ryan, Dr. Ryan, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in terms of, there are just so many questions there. It's very hard to give credible answers to all of them in one go. Absolutely, the issue of pandemic preparedness planning is very important, and many countries had not updated their pandemic preparedness plans in advance of this pandemic. And, you know, we're being very clear that preparedness in general around the world was not adequate to deal with the impact of the current pandemic. And we need to learn that lesson, that we need to be much better prepared for the next one. And national pandemic preparedness planning, community resilience, collaborative surveillance, community protection, access to countermeasures, safe, scalable clinical care. All of these issues need to be taken into account when we talk about pandemic preparedness planning at national level. At regional and global level, then, we need to be able to support that national planning, and we need to be able to bring the goods, the services, the technologies to support that national planning, mechanisms to build rapid innovation, rapid scale-up of production, fair and equitable distribution of countermeasures to countries, training, and many other things that need to come from a global level to support and supplement what's going on at national level. Without strong national preparedness, there is no global solution. Global health security, regional health security of the European Union is based on a fundamental principle that we need strong national action plans for public health security. And when we can connect strong national systems, we connect them through global data, global services, global collaboration, global innovation, then we have something that looks like global health security. A purely top-down approach to delivering on pandemic preparedness will not work. Pandemics and epidemics begin and end in communities. We need to build community resilience. We need to build community engagement. We need to build frontline primary healthcare and direct services to people at community level. We can't do that purely with a global lens. So I very much agree with that assessment. With regards to YouTube, we're not a policeman of YouTube. Our job is not to say what is on or off on any particular social media or other platform. We engage intensively with social media platforms to ensure that the best information is getting out there. My view has always been personally that we need to get better at putting strong, positive, scientifically based, evidence-based information to ordinary people so they get to make a good, well-informed health choice for themselves and for their families. Questioning and the ability of ordinary people to question medical interventions is an absolute right. Hesitancy and seeking understanding and explanation for the use of medical products is also an important right that people have. What people don't necessarily have the right to do is to actively spread disinformation and misinformation and actively try to disrupt health responses that are aimed at saving people's lives. And that has happened too often in this global response. We don't have a formal relationship with the YouTubes brothers or have specific meetings with any of those platforms. We do engage with them on improving our messaging, and we want to work more closely with platforms to ensure that there is a good discourse, to ensure that there are good debates, and that the right information is out there for people to access. That's a very important concept for us. And the question on vaccines, currently with vaccines and with the emergence of variants, and specifically variants in the Omicron space and many sub-variants in that, the WHO TAG COVAC, the Technical Advisory Group on COVID vaccination, has suggested, and followed by SAGE, have suggested that booster doses of vaccine using Omicron-based boosters is a useful idea, but that primary vaccination should be with the ancestral strain of vaccine, because that gives the best, broadest protection across all of the different variants. But that booster doses can come from Omicron-related strains, and that's happening more and more with many companies coming to the market now with booster doses that contain variant strains of slightly, they have slightly different strains, but most of them are in the Omicron variant side. So we continue to recommend primary vaccination, your first two vaccines to come from the ancestral original strain, and then boosters after that, based on a given country circulating strains, may use variant vaccines that have slightly different composition based on what the government's judgment in a particular country is for what is their most common circulating strain at any one time. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Then Mr. Weimers.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Michael Ryan, welcome to this special committee, which I propose to be set up to look into the origins of COVID. Now, the Chinese Communist Party refused to share data with the WHO and pressured the WHO team investigating the origins into downplaying the virus' likely lab leak origins in Wuhan, China. The CCP further spread disinformation about the virus originating in Bangladesh, Greece, India, Italy, the Czech Republic, Australia, the United States, Russia, Serbia, Norway, or South Korea. The G7 called for, I quote, a timely, transparent, expert-led and science-based WHO-convened phase 2 COVID-19 origin study, unquote. However, you stated yourself last year that because the WHO works by persuasion, it lacks the power to compel China to cooperate. Dr. Ryan, will the WHO's phase 2 origin study remove everything pointing to China's culpability as in the phase 1 study? What steps has the WHO taken to gain access to China's raw patient data in order to determine the origins of the virus and thereby disprove CCP disinformation? Furthermore, can the WHO shed any light relating to the hundreds of thousands of euros in EU subsidies granted to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, specifically funding under the so-called European Virus Archive project, which also was intended for, quote, the production of viruses, unquote? And does the WHO consider it necessary to strengthen safeguards with regard to so-called gain-of-function research? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Donato.
Thank you very much, Mrs. President. Well, I have two important questions. The first one is about the work on the international health regulation, the pandemic treaty. You highlighted the importance of parliaments in your work and collaboration. I need to know if you want to have any collaboration with the European Parliament and especially this committee, letting us have the drafts of this treaty and allowing us to give our opinion, at least, on it, to contribute as a European Parliament to the writing down of this important treaty. The second question is also about the origin of the virus. I'm really disappointed by the fact that after 2 years and a half, your organization hasn't yet been able to give a precise answer about these origins, because we can read several independent scientific studies saying that the origin of this virus is synthetic. The SARS-CoV-2 virus has a synthetic origin, and this can be told not only investigating on the Chinese laboratory, but just investigating on the structure of this virus. In fact, the study that I've just read, published on the Bioxriv magazine, I quote, says that the endonuclease fingerprint indicates a synthetic origin of SARS-CoV-2. And there is a detailed list of reasons for which the structure of the virus cannot be a natural one. So if some of your accredited scientists have arguments to dispute the results of these studies, please do it, but just give us some answers, because you said that the human greed is one of the main reasons basing the diseases and the outbreaks of threats to human health. So if this is true, maybe human greed is behind the gain-of-function research that is responsible for this pandemic and probably for next ones. So the first thing you should focus on is just to forbid gain-of-function research at a global level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wants to raise a question? Mrs. de la Pisa, please.
Y una pregunta muy concreta.
It's a very concrete question. What your views on how the international health regulation has been complied with when it comes to biological alerts here in this context. Thank you.
That's the shortest question you ever asked, Mrs. Lapisa. Dr. Ryan, for the final answers, please, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. I'm a little taken aback with some of the assertions being made. We're supposed to be science-based in our observations, yet what I hear here are assessments. You're entitled to your individual assessments, absolutely, as individuals. But you also have to address the evidence in a balanced way. And the paper you referred to is a non-peer-reviewed paper that's just been published as one of thousands of papers that have been published in this area. In terms of the one you just, I believe the one you just referred to, we will wait for that to be peer-reviewed. There have been opinions on all sides of this equation in terms of natural origin, engineered origin of this virus, back and forth, and there is no consensus, absolutely. WHO has been very, very clear to say that all hypotheses remain on the table because there isn't absolute convincing evidence in either direction. We keep that, and we keep that position open as further evidence develops. And we'll read these new papers with great interest and add them to the Scientific Advisory Group on Origins, which is a group of experts from all over the world who meet now on a constant basis to consider all of this new evidence. In terms of, I can't speak to the issue of the EU's support to gain-of-function studies or support to labs in Wuhan. That's for the European Union and its member states to sort out. I'm not there to provide you with information as to what your own member states are doing or not doing. The issue of lack of power, WHO as a UN organisation, as a member state organisation, has no legal power to enter a country. In the same way that you there in the European Parliament or the European Union has no legal power to enter a European country. You're a federation of states that have come together for economic integration, social integration, justice integration and other things. But there are rights retained by your individual member states. And those rights are sovereign and those rights are protected. And in this context, the rights of our member states are protected. You may not like that. You may not find that acceptable, but that is the reality. And that is the reality of your own organisation as you sit there. So please, don't come to me telling me about our lack of power. I understand the limitations of the powers that we have. We push to use the powers that we do have to the maximum, and we accept those limitations. And we accept the subsidiarity of member states and their sovereign right to make their own decisions. If member states then wish to argue with each other whether one member state is doing wrong and one member state is doing right, please do. Come to the World Health Assembly and debate it. Come to the Executive Board and debate it. Debate it between your parliament and the other parliaments that you feel are not representing proper practice. But it's not in the power of WHO to enter a country illegally and carry out what would be, under any national law, illegal activity without an invitation to do so. With regard to the different phases of the investigation, we have had teams on the ground. We've had more teams on the ground than any of the European Union teams on the ground or any teams from any of your individual member states. In fact, we've been on the ground a number of times in China. And it is difficult and it is challenging to be able to get the information that we need to get. But at least we're trying, at least we're there. At least we're trying to get access to the scientific information. We're not just standing on soapboxes and pedestals and telling others what they should be doing. And we will continue to try to get to the bottom of this. We will continue to try and find the source of this virus because it's a very important task if we're going to avoid future pandemics. With regard to the last question, which was short in terms of the IHR and compliance with biologic alerts, we've seen a huge increase in compliance with reporting to WHO over the last 20 years in relation to the IHR 2005. In fact, I've been around in and out of WHO since 1995. I noticed a huge improvement in compliance. But that doesn't mean that compliance is universal. Some of the countries in your own union are not so transparent in how they engage with WHO in reporting disease. Many countries around the world have real difficulties in being able to report disease, either because they don't have the surveillance systems or because they fear the economic consequences as in the consequences to the likes of South Africa. When they openly and transparently reported their variant, the European Union and members of the European Union were very quick to shut down their air traffic and exclude their citizens. So there are real economic and political consequences of transparency. And countries are punished for transparency and continually and repeatedly punished by parliaments, punished by politicians for being transparent. So we need a new deal. We need a new openness. We need not to have sanctions for reporting. We need to have incentives to report. And we need to put in place checks and balances and supports to countries whose economies will inevitably be disrupted by transparency and by transparently reporting disease. So I think you and us at WHO, we have a job to do in your parliaments and in WHO as a member state organisation in trying to find better ways to create positive incentives to transparency, positive incentives to engagement, and getting rid of the negative incentives which many member states have put in place and continue to pursue, which creates a very difficult landscape for us to operate in. Many countries around the world engage in lab-based research. Gain of function is just one particular methodology. Biosafety and biosecurity are increasingly common. The availability of biomanipulation techniques and technologies for same are increasing. The opportunity for the misuse of viruses is increasing. The question is, are the motivations for misuse increasing? The motivations to misuse viruses or bacteria is a political process. It's a process around whether people wish to do that and whether they want to cause harm or create difficulty. The opportunity certainly increases because the technologies are increasing. But I would ask you to look at countries in the European Union, countries in North America, countries all around the world who are engaged in a vast array of biologic research for the development of pharmaceuticals, for finding better ways to treat disease. It's happening all over the world, and having a stronger biosafety and biosecurity framework in place would benefit everybody. This is just not in one part of the world. And many countries, particularly countries in the north, are investing in studies and investing in work in the south. It's not just one country or two countries. So we do need to have better oversight and better regulation of how biotechnology has been used. We need much more responsible use of life sciences around the world, and we need to be able to understand that we have responsibilities to ensure that all of our life science research, all of our research in the biologic space needs to be done with high levels of safety and high levels of responsibility. And we look forward to working with the Parliament, we look forward to working with the European Union on trying to strengthen both the frameworks for biosafety and biosecurity and also strengthen cooperation and transparency. It's in our mutual interest to ensure that these things happen. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. The WHO looks forward to continuing to work with you, and we very much thank. It has been really the European Parliament and through Charles Michel and others that we saw the initiation of the first idea to create a treaty. And in terms of making sure that European Union countries and the Parliament there have access to, I believe there will be a draft 0 being presented around the treaty in December. The European Union is heavily engaged and involved. Many European countries are represented on the international negotiating body, and I would assume through their good offices that you will see and have an opportunity to contribute to the development of the accord or framework convention or treaty in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan, and rest assured we will pick that up, this ambition of this COVID committee, not just to the lessons learned, but to draw lessons and have an impact in the negotiations on the pandemic treaty, but also changing the international health regulation, because the two sides of the coin are very important for us. And of course, we do raise questions about the role on China, because we had South Africa earlier on today. South Africa did what they had to do when they discovered the Omicron virus. They reported immediately. And instead of being rewarded for that, the world punished them. So there's something really very wrong. And it's not the World Health Organization to blame. We know what your powers are and not are. But I think together we need to address these issues and strengthen these international treaties and regulations to make sure that we are much more resilient as a world, and we cooperate much more better. But thanks for being here. Being frank, I like that. It's important that everybody can raise their questions here and that you and our other guests can also reply in a frank way. I think that's good. That's helpful. It enlightens us also with regard to our report that we intend to write next year. Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan, and I thank all the colleagues for being here up until the end. It's been, again, a very intensive morning from 9 to almost 1 o'clock. So I wish you a very good lunch and see you next time. And the next time is?
It's 14 November.
14 November, voilà. I think we will go now to the third pillar of our mandate, and that is the socio-economic impact, and I think that will be very interesting as well. Thank you very much.